In the YouTube video titled Lecture 10, Multiple Encryption and Brute Force Attacks by Christof Paar, Professor Paar commences by reviewing the topic of symmetric cryptography, particularly data encryption standards and modes of operation, which were covered prior to the Christmas break. He emphasizes that two crucial subjects, inherently challenging to acquire elsewhere, will be discussed today, namely multiple encryption and brute force attacks. He elaborates on multiple encryption, highlighting the shortcomings of double encryption, particularly its vulnerability to the meet-in-the-middle attack. This attack, Professor Paar explains, demonstrates the inefficacy of double encryption, making it a dubious cryptographic strategy. To illustrate the concept, Professor Paar utilizes the venerable Data Encryption Standard, DES, demonstrating how its inherent weakness stems from its limited 56-bit key length. This weakness renders DES susceptible to brute force attacks. Next, Professor Paar delves into a thorough exploration of the meet-in-the-middle attack, dissecting its two-phase methodology. Phase 1 involves a standard brute force attack against the left side of the encryption process, where intermediate values are meticulously stored in a table. The second phase entails a similar brute force attack on the right side of the encryption, comparing these intermediate values with the table generated in Phase 1. The success of the attack hinges upon identifying a matching value, thereby revealing the keys used in the encryption process. Professor Paar underscores the surprising efficacy of this attack, revealing that it can even crack triple encryption, a technique frequently implemented to bolster the security of DES. He stresses that triple encryption provides only a marginal enhancement in security, suggesting that employing ciphers with extended key lengths is a more effective and prudent approach. From 0 minutes to 5 minutes of the video, Professor Paar introduces the lecture's topics, outlining that it will delve into the concept of multiple encryption, specifically double and triple encryption, and the complexities of brute force attacks. He emphasizes the importance of these subjects within the domain of symmetric cryptography. Professor Paar explains that the first section of the lecture will focus on double encryption, specifically discussing the vulnerabilities it presents, particularly through the meet-in-the-middle attack. Professor Paar then provides a rudimentary illustration of double encryption, employing a simple visual representation. He highlights that this method involves encrypting data twice, utilizing two distinct keys, K sub L, left key, and K sub R, right key. Each key, he emphasizes, comprises 56 bits, resulting in a substantial key space of 2 to the power of 56 possible keys. He proceeds to articulate the concept of a naive brute force attack against double encryption, emphasizing that this attack involves systematically decrypting the ciphertext twice, utilizing each key in turn, and comparing the resulting plaintext with the original. He calculates the complexity of this brute force attack, outlining that, given 2 to the power of 56 possible keys for each encryption, the total number of key tests required is 2 to the power of 56 multiplied by 2 to the power of 56, yielding 2 to the power of 112. Professor Paar underlines the impracticality of this naive brute force attack due to the sheer magnitude of the key space, thus highlighting the necessity of exploring more efficient approaches for breaking double encryption. In the YouTube video titled Lecture 10, Multiple Encryption and Brute Force Attacks by Christof Paar, Professor Paar commences by illuminating the vulnerability of the Data Encryption Standard, DES, due to its diminutive 56-bit key length, rendering it susceptible to brute force attacks with specialized hardware that can be procured for a relatively modest sum. In pursuit of enhanced security, Professor Paar proposes the concept of double encryption, where plaintext is subjected to two sequential encryption operations using distinct keys, aptly designated as the left key, KL, and the right key, KR. However, Professor Paar deftly unveils a formidable attack known as the meet-in-the-middle attack, which effectively undermines the perceived security of double encryption. This attack, meticulously dissected by Professor Paar, unfolds in two phases. The first phase entails a brute force approach, exhaustively iterating through all conceivable KL values, 2 to the power of 56, with the attendant intermediate results meticulously stored in a table. The second phase pivots to ciphertext decryption, employing a similar brute force strategy to evaluate all potential KR values, 2 to the power of 56. The crux of the attack lies in the comparison of the decrypted results with the entries in the table generated during Phase 1. A successful match between a decrypted result and a table entry signals the identification of both KL and KR, effectively compromising the encryption. Professor Paar elucidates that the computational complexity of the meet-in-the-middle attack is effectively 2 to the power of 56 for each phase, culminating in an overall complexity of 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 56 equals 2 to the power of 57. While this attack does represent a marginal improvement in security over the standard DES, 2 to the power of 56 complexity, the gain is negligible and insufficient to guarantee robust protection against determined attackers. To concretize the attack, Professor Paar presents a hypothetical scenario where Ellis seeks to encrypt a plaintext message, X1, using a double encryption scheme. Oscar, the adversary, intercepts the ciphertext, Y1, and meticulously executes the meet-in-the-middle attack. Oscar commences by decrypting Y1 using all possible KR values, populating a table with the resultant intermediate values. Subsequently, Oscar encrypts X1 using all plausible KL values, systematically searching for a match within the previously constructed table. Professor Paar astutely observes that Oscar may unearth multiple keys that ostensibly decrypt Y1 correctly, but these keys are merely spurious candidates and not the genuine keys utilized by Ellis. To authenticate the discovered keys, Oscar necessitates an additional plaintext ciphertext pair, X2, Y2, and rigorously verifies whether the purported keys can accurately decrypt both Y1 and Y2. This technique, known as triple encryption, leverages 3 distinct keys and exhibits a complexity of 2 to the power of 112, effectively doubling the key length and augmenting the computational effort required to compromise the encryption. Professor Paar astutely underscores that the meet-in-the-middle attack constitutes a critical vulnerability in double encryption, effectively diminishing its security efficacy. Conversely, triple encryption, with its enhanced computational complexity, is generally deemed secure and enjoys widespread implementation in modern passports and German identification cards. From 10 minutes to 15 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the naive approach to breaking double encryption, positing a scenario where an attacker seeks to decrypt a ciphertext by exhaustively testing all possible keys. He elucidates that this approach entails decrypting the ciphertext with every conceivable key, resulting in 2 to the power of 56 attempts for the first decryption. Subsequently, for each of these 2 to the power of 56 key trials, the attacker would then decrypt the resulting plaintext with all possible keys for the second decryption, again requiring 2 to the power of 56 tests. This multiplicative effect culminates in a total of 2 to the power of 56 * 2 to the power of 56 equals 2 to the power of 112 key trials, an astronomical number rendering this method computationally infeasible, taking, as Professor Paar humorously notes, nearly the entire lifespan of the universe to complete. From 15 minutes to 20 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the complexities of brute force attacks on double encryption, highlighting the impracticality of the naive approach. This method involves exhaustively testing all combinations of left and right keys, resulting in a staggering complexity of 2 to the power of 112 key tests. Professor Paar then introduces a more sophisticated and efficient method, the meet-in-the-middle attack, which involves 2 distinct phases. The first phase entails encrypting the plaintext using all conceivable left keys, subsequently storing the resulting ciphertexts in a table. This phase exhibits a complexity of 2 to the power of 56 encryptions. The second phase involves decrypting the ciphertext using all plausible right keys and searching for a corresponding entry within the previously generated table. While a match within the table does not unequivocally indicate the discovery of the correct keys, as other keys might yield the same ciphertext, verification with a second plaintext ciphertext pair significantly strengthens the probability of discovering the correct keys. This attack demonstrably reduces the overall complexity, as it involves 2 to the power of 56 encryptions in the first phase and 2 to the power of 56 decryptions in the second phase, yielding a total complexity of approximately 2 to the power of 57. This represents a considerable improvement over the naive approach, underscoring the vulnerability of double encryption to this attack. Professor Paar concludes that double encryption proves to be an inadequate security strategy due to its susceptibility to the meet-in-the-middle attack. From 20 minutes to 25 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the meet-in-the-middle attack, a technique for compromising double encryption. He underscores the efficacy and efficiency of this attack, highlighting the inherent weakness of double encryption as a security measure. The attack is executed in two distinct phases. The initial phase entails a conventional brute force assault on the left side of the encryption process, systematically decrypting all conceivable keys and meticulously cataloging the intermediate outcomes in a dedicated table. This tabular repository encapsulates a considerable quantity of data, encompassing 2 raised to the power of 56 entries. While substantial, such a dataset is realistically achievable with adequate resources. The second phase of the attack leverages the table constructed in the first phase to decrypt the ciphertext, actively searching for congruent values. The discovery of a collision, signifying a match between a ciphertext decryption result and an entry in the table, marks a successful identification of a potential key. Professor Paar elucidates the possibility of false positives, acknowledging that the key identified at this stage may not be the authentic key employed for encryption. He introduces the concept of wrong keys, which are keys that, despite achieving successful decryption, deviate from the original encryption keys. He subsequently illustrates the notion of the wrong key using a hypothetical block cipher with an 80-bit key and a 64-bit block size. His demonstration reveals that the number of wrong keys that could be generated is 2 raised to the power of 80 minus the number of pairs, 2 in this case, multiplied by the block size, 64. Consequently, in this example, the number of wrong keys reaches 2 raised to the power of 16, equating to 65,000. This exemplifies that even within a relatively compact key space, the presence of wrong keys can be statistically significant. From 25 minutes to 30 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elaborates on the meet-in-the-middle attack by introducing the concept of a collision. A collision occurs when a calculated value, denoted as z, is identical to a value already stored within the table constructed during the attack's initial phase. Professor Paar emphasizes that the discovery of a collision suggests that the key used to determine z might be the correct key, referred to as KT. The speaker then outlines a systematic procedure to verify if the candidate key is indeed the actual key, KT. This involves decrypting the ciphertext, Y1, utilizing the candidate key and comparing the outcome to the original plaintext, X1. If a collision is detected, the attacker will decrypt Y1 using the candidate key, leading to the retrieval of the original plaintext, X1, signifying the successful identification of the correct key. This process effectively demonstrates the vulnerability of double encryption by offering a method for an attacker to efficiently ascertain the correct keys, achieving a significantly lower complexity compared to a standard brute force approach. From 30 minutes to 35 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elucidates the concept of collision within the framework of a brute force attack. He defines a collision as the occurrence when a value computed during the attack is already present within the table constructed during the initial phase. The identification of a collision signifies that a potential key has been discovered, although it may not be the actual key used to encrypt the data. Professor Paar underscores the significance of this collision concept for comprehending the efficacy of the meet-in-the-middle attack. He provides a visual representation of the attack's operational mechanism, demonstrating that a collision is ultimately identified by systematically iterating through all potential keys and comparing them to the values in the table. This collision, while not necessarily the correct key, serves as a potential candidate key for further analysis. Professor Paar highlights that with a sufficiently large table and a sufficient number of iterations, the probability of encountering a false positive key diminishes, thereby enhancing the effectiveness of the attack. From 35 minutes to 40 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the concept of double encryption, demonstrating its vulnerability to the meet-in-the-middle attack. He elucidates that instead of concurrently searching for the 2 keys involved, a more efficient strategy is to conduct searches for each key independently. The crux of this approach lies in identifying a point of convergence where, after examining all possible left keys, one can subsequently assess all potential right keys. This technique significantly reduces the computational complexity, yielding an attack that requires only 2 to the power of 56 operations for the left key search and 2 to the power of 56 operations for the right key search. This equates to a total of 2 to the power of 57 operations, effectively rendering double encryption only marginally more secure than a single encryption. Professor Paar emphatically concludes that, due to this minimal increase in security, double encryption is a largely ineffectual and wasteful practice. From 40 minutes to 45 minutes of the video, Professor Paar transitions to a discussion of triple encryption, a technique designed to enhance the security of single DES by applying the encryption process 3 times with distinct keys, K1, K2, and K3. While the principle of the meet-in-the-middle attack remains relevant, Professor Paar elucidates that its complexity in the context of triple encryption is not significantly augmented compared to double encryption. This is attributed to the additive nature of the attack's complexity across stages, as opposed to a multiplicative relationship. Professor Paar provides a compelling illustration. If the complexity of discerning K1 is 2 to the power of 56 operations, and similarly for K3, the attacker would only require 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 56, equating to 2 to the power of 57 operations. This underscores the fact that triple encryption offers only marginal security enhancements over single encryption, rendering it a less-than-ideal solution for bolstering cryptographic strength. To conclude this segment, Professor Paar briefly explores the intriguing concept of encryption-decryption-encryption modes within triple DES, where the decryption step occupies the middle position within the triple encryption process. From 45 minutes to 50 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the efficacy of triple encryption as a countermeasure to the inherent weaknesses of the Data Encryption Standard, DES. He demonstrates that despite implementing 3 successive rounds of encryption, the enhanced security afforded by triple DES remains marginal. This is because the meet-in-the-middle attack, an elegant and potent cryptanalytic technique, still proves remarkably effective. The professor elucidates the meet-in-the-middle attack process, emphasizing that it necessitates the creation of 2 separate tables, one each for the first and third keys, with each table containing 2 to the power of 56 values. This step demands considerable computational resources. However, the attacker can exploit these tables to rapidly identify matching values, 2 to the power of 56 comparisons, instead of exhaustively testing all 2 to the power of 112 possible combinations of keys. This disparity in computational complexity underscores the limited security enhancement provided by triple encryption. The professor concludes by asserting that, despite this limitation, triple DES, with its effective key length of 112 bits, remains a viable security measure in contemporary applications such as passport security. From 50 minutes to 55 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elucidates the efficacy of triple encryption in the context of symmetric cryptography. While acknowledging the tripling of encryption workload, he asserts that the meet-in-the-middle attack remains the most efficient attack strategy for triple encryption. He emphasizes the significantly reduced complexity of this attack, 2 to the power of 112, compared to the brute force attack's complexity of 2 to the power of 168. Professor Paar then elaborates on the security rationale behind employing triple encryption. Despite requiring 168 key bits, it achieves a security level of 112 bits, deemed sufficient for contemporary applications like passport security. The professor subsequently delves into a specific case of triple DES in E-mode, where encryption/decryption occurs within a dedicated hardware module. He posits that this process incurs minimal computational cost, effectively negligible in terms of security implications. Despite the hardware module's presence, he underscores the continued vulnerability of triple encryption to the meet-in-the-middle attack. From 55 minutes to 60 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the complexities of ensuring secure encryption for embedded hardware modules, specifically addressing the challenges presented by the limited computational capabilities of such devices. He begins by emphasizing the inadequacy of standard DES encryption, highlighting its vulnerability to brute force attacks. To address this vulnerability, he proposes a solution utilizing triple DES encryption, a technique that significantly enhances security by performing 3 sequential encryption operations using distinct keys. The resultant security level of 112 bits is deemed highly robust against conventional attacks. The discussion then shifts to the meet-in-the-middle attack, a method often employed to compromise encryption schemes. Professor Paar explains that the attack's complexity escalates exponentially with the number of encryption rounds. In the case of triple DES, the attack necessitates a search through a table of size 2 to the power of 112, a task of immense computational demand that renders the attack impractical. This exponential growth in complexity arises from the need to double the table size for each additional encryption round. Professor Paar concludes by emphasizing the widespread adoption of triple DES encryption in embedded hardware modules, particularly for critical applications like passport security. He acknowledges the existence of more sophisticated encryption methods but recognizes their impracticality for constrained hardware due to their higher computational cost. The triple DES approach, despite its simplicity, provides a highly effective and widely implemented security solution for such applications. From 60 minutes to 65 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elucidates the concept of triple DES encryption and its efficacy in mitigating the vulnerabilities inherent in double DES. He explains that while triple DES appears to be a straightforward solution for enhancing security by performing encryption thrice, this notion is somewhat simplistic. The meet-in-the-middle attack, while not rendered completely ineffective, does experience a significant increase in complexity, rising to 2 to the power of 112 operations compared to 2 to the power of 56 for double DES. Despite this heightened computational complexity, triple DES's security enhancement remains incremental rather than transformative. The increased effort required for an attacker remains within the scope of feasibility for a resolute adversary equipped with suitable resources. Professor Paar emphasizes that triple DES, despite its superior security relative to double DES, possesses an effective key length of 112 bits, a reflection of the attack's inherent complexity. He goes on to note that triple DES finds frequent implementation in security-critical applications such as contemporary passports, with its effective key length of 112 bits deemed adequate for safeguarding sensitive data. From 65 minutes to 70 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the phenomenon of false positives, a common occurrence during exhaustive key searches, often referred to as brute force attacks. Utilizing a block cipher with an 80-bit key and a 64-bit block size as an example, he illustrates that a brute force attack on a single plaintext/ciphertext pair will result in approximately 65,000 false positive keys. This phenomenon arises due to the random mapping of a set comprising 2 to the power of 64 possible plaintexts to another set of 2 to the power of 64 possible ciphertexts. To mitigate the impact of these false positives and enhance the accuracy of the attack, Professor Paar introduces the concept of employing multiple plaintext/ciphertext pairs. With 2 pairs, the likelihood of encountering a false positive key decreases drastically, as the attacker must locate a key that accurately maps both pairs. The probability of identifying a false positive key using 2 pairs is reduced to 2/80 to 128, a remarkably low figure. Professor Paar emphasizes that as the number of pairs used in the attack increases, the probability of finding a false positive key diminishes exponentially. This principle underscores the efficacy of utilizing multiple known plaintext/ciphertext pairs to pinpoint the correct key. He explains that in real-world cryptographic scenarios, especially when multiple pairs are employed, the probability of an attacker randomly stumbling upon the correct key is infinitesimally small. This fundamental concept underpins the security enhancements implemented in modern cryptographic systems, like the triple DES algorithm used in contemporary passports. From 70 minutes to 75 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the complexity of the meet-in-the-middle attack, highlighting its efficacy in compromising double encryption. The attack is executed in 2 distinct phases. The initial phase entails exhaustively iterating through all potential left keys, KL, by decrypting the ciphertext, Y1, with each key and storing the resulting values, ZL, in a lookup table. The subsequent phase leverages the table generated in the first phase to enumerate all potential right keys, KR, decrypting the ciphertext, Y1, with each key and comparing the result to the table. A match between the decrypted value and an entry in the table signifies a potential correct key combination. The speaker emphasizes that the computational complexity of this attack when applied to a 56-bit DS cipher is 2 to the power of 56 encryptions for the first phase and an additional 2 to the power of 56 encryptions for the second phase, leading to a total complexity of 2 to the power of 57, only marginally more secure than a single DES implementation. From 75 minutes to 80 minutes of the video, the speaker delves into the computational complexity of a brute force attack on double encryption. He underscores that the naive approach, which entails enumerating every conceivable combination of the left and right keys, culminates in a staggering 2 to the power of 112 key tests. However, the speaker introduces a more refined attack, aptly termed the meet-in-the-middle attack. This attack strategically dissects the double encryption process, enabling a more efficient key recovery. The attacker initiates by exhaustively exploring the space of all plausible left keys, decrypting the ciphertext using each key and meticulously storing the results in a table. Subsequently, they methodically traverse the space of potential right keys, again decrypting the ciphertext and comparing the resulting plaintexts against the entries in the table. If a correspondence is detected, the attacker has successfully identified the encryption keys. The speaker highlights that the computational complexity of the meet-in-the-middle attack is significantly reduced. The first phase necessitates 2 to the power of 56 encryptions, while the second phase involves an additional 2 to the power of 56 decryptions. Importantly, these phases are executed sequentially, yielding a cumulative complexity of 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 56, which approximates to 2 to the power of 57. This marked reduction in computational cost makes the meet-in-the-middle attack considerably more efficient than the naive approach, which was burdened by a complexity of 2 to the power of 112. From 80 minutes to 85 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the intriguing phenomenon of false positives within the context of brute force attacks targeting block ciphers. While acknowledging the inherently laborious nature of such attacks, he underscores the potential for the emergence of spurious, seemingly valid results stemming from the use of incorrect keys. To elucidate this concept, he presents a concrete example involving an 80-bit block cipher. The scenario posited involves an attacker striving to identify a key capable of mapping a given plaintext to a predetermined ciphertext. In this process, the attacker systematically iterates through a multitude of keys, encountering numerous instances of unsuccessful decryption attempts. However, Professor Paar emphasizes the likelihood of encountering a considerable number of false positives, keys that, despite not being the genuine cipher key, yield the correct ciphertext when applied to the plaintext. To quantify the probability of encountering these erroneous, yet seemingly valid, results, Professor Paar introduces a formula. This formula asserts that the anticipated number of false positives is equivalent to 2 raised to the power of key length, number of plaintext ciphertext pairs asterisk block size. In this particular example, the key length is 80 bits, the block size is 64 bits, and the number of plaintext ciphertext pairs is 2. Substituting these values into the formula results in 2 to the power of 80 to 2 asterisk 64, or 2 to the power of minus 48. This diminutive probability effectively underscores the rarity of encountering false positives in practical scenarios. Professor Paar concludes by highlighting the inverse relationship between the quantity of plaintext ciphertext pairs and the likelihood of encountering false positives. An increased number of pairs leads to a diminished exponent in the aforementioned formula, consequently making false positives even less probable. In essence, this segment of the video dissects the potential challenges associated with false positives in brute force attacks. The lecturer demonstrates how the likelihood of encountering these deceptive outcomes diminishes considerably as key lengths increase and the availability of multiple plaintext ciphertext pairs grows. From 85 minutes to 87 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the intriguing concept of false positive keys within the context of brute force attacks on block ciphers. He lucidly elucidates that while brute force attacks can yield keys that ostensibly function correctly, these keys may not be the authentic keys employed during encryption. To illustrate this phenomenon, he presents an example of a block cipher with an 80-bit key space and a 64-bit block size. He emphasizes that a brute force attack on such a cipher entails an exhaustive search through a vast key space of 2 to the power of 80, significantly exceeding the 2 to the power of 64 possible plaintexts. The speaker articulates that if an attacker discovers a key that successfully encrypts X1 to Y1 and X2 to Y2, this does not unequivocally guarantee the key's authenticity. This is because the key space encompasses multiple keys capable of producing identical ciphertexts for a given plaintext, resulting in the potential for false positives.